All that to come, but we begin with an abstract visual artist's response to the modern world. That's if Richard Deacon, the sculptor who won the Turner Prize back in 1987, really is an abstract artist. He has a large and very diverse new exhibition at the Liverpool Tate Gallery. What dominates is a set of three very big pieces which just fit into the enlarged roof space of the fourth floor Albert Dock Special Exhibition Galleries. The natural light has been enhanced there too. These three pieces I can best describe as being like big tangles of snakes or pipes made out of wooden sections fastened together. The frames of pipes or snakes not solid. It looks both industrial and, because it's wood, organic too, fixed and somehow squirming with movement and energy. When we went round with the Tate's director, Lewis Biggs, Richard Deacon offered a rather surprising insight into the inspiration for these dramatic sculptures.
There's this very simple anecdote to describe actually what I thought I was trying to do, which was standing in the supermarket buying cheese and looking at a piece of Swiss cheese and wondering what it would look like when the holes got so big there was very little cheese left. And that seemed to be, as a kind of way of thinking about it, it actually seemed to do exactly what I wanted to pursue from the other work, where you get these kind of combinations of overlapping materials, holes through it, etc. And the change in thinking was to think that I was making a continuous hole rather than a tube. So that was where that work came from.
Well, I first became interested in Richard's work in 1980, and in the context of what was happening at that time in sculpture, his work was very, it appeared to be very poetic. And that's the best word for it. I mean, whether metaphor or analogy or simile or whatever word one uses, his work was lyrical, definitely lyrical and poetic. And that was quite unusual at a time when a lot of sculpture was very minimal or very conceptual and in a dematerialized way. His work is very material. His work has a lot of craft in it. I mean, craft is a difficult word, but his work is very obviously made, and the making of it is a very interesting aspect of it. And as time has gone by, his work has developed and expanded. And in some ways, what I just described as craft, but the making, the fabrication of the work, which is such a feature of Richard's work, is at the moment rather an unfashionable thing. Most sculptors are either working with electronic media or with very thrown together materials. So I think that is something which becomes more and more interesting in Richard's work.
When I made that, the thing that I found intriguing and that was unexpected to me, or really unanticipated, was the extent to which, when you viewed it from one view, the wood seemed to fill the entire space of the object, and so that it was sort of empty and full at the same time, which is an effect of foreshortening, an optical effect. And I became interested in how it might be possible to weave together an empty space and an object, so that what you start to see at one point is the empty space and the material at the same time. So you have the sense that the space and material are interwoven.
One of these large pieces is called Laocoon, like the classical statue of the early Trojan War casualty who wrestled with snakes. But if Richard Deacon's work is never quite abstract, it doesn't ever quite replicate objects or figures from real life either. The exhibition has three other sections. One has 4 photographs in a constructed empty room. One is of small objects grouped under the title Art for Other People, and here I particularly liked a piece in which globules of clear glass blown into moulds have been stuck together. And the fourth includes objects of a size that relate to our own scale. There's a kind of cubist hedgehog here made of varnished cardboard pyramids. Deacon has called the show New World Order, and the title is partly sardonic, partly a utopian attempt to make something new.
The phrase obviously refers to George Bush's Koino in the Gulf War. At the time, I recall recoiling a bit at the appropriation of the phrase, but actually also recognizing that it is a very resonant phrase. The reason I chose it for the show was partly to do with the fact that the earliest works come from 91, so there's it fairly closely links to the way in which that phrase entered the vocabulary. Secondly, to do with the sense in which I feel that I've been looking for a world in the work that I make, and looking for it, and also cataloguing is kind of slightly the wrong word, but trying to make things which belong to the world that I've been looking for.
I think something which is quite unique with Richard is his interest in words, and that's why the poetry analogy is important, and the figures of speech, if you like, because he's fascinated by words, and the sculptures are instruments in the same way that words are, in order to access those parts of ourselves which we might not otherwise reach.
I think that the material and the fact that it's made should be both present at the same time. And there is a kind of complicated relationship between the inert and the manipulated. And nowhere in the exhibition really is there raw material. So it's most of the materials I use aren't raw in that kind of log, stone, clay sense. They're all materials which are processed in some way before even the wood is sort of processed, before it starts to work with, so that its naturalness is somehow the stuff is the word I've always used is stuff, so that madeness and stuffness should be present in the work at the same time.
Richard Deacon and Lewis Biggs at the Tate Gallery in Liverpool. Alistair Smith's been to see the exhibition. He joins me now on the line from Manchester, where he's director of the Whitworth Gallery. Alistair Smith, I was trying to characterise Richard Deacon's work in a recognisable shorthand, and it's almost impossible to do. It's very hard to say in very short and clear marketing terms, I suppose, what he's about. How would you describe it?
Well, I think you do have difficulties in finding a cliche, a label for the work, because it is so very diverse, and there is a multiplicity of technique and a great variety of scale in this exhibition. And I think that's what makes it a wonderful experience as an art exhibition. I see myself almost disagreeing with the artist, if that's not too presumptuous, who's emphasizing the materiality, the stuffness of the stuff, as he almost said. Because to me, the materiality, the way of making it, is actually subsumed by the idea that each of the works seems to embody. And somehow or other, I think that we feel that the ideas of Deacon come to the fore here. I mean, the question to me is really, he seems to have a tap on what people have been thinking about for the last 15 years, about environment, about the modification of natural forms through science, even, you might say, genetically modified food at this moment. There's a feeling in which natural objects are somehow translated as if they're being viewed through a microscope. You get the feeling that on occasions that you're looking at objects, you're looking at the DNA of actual natural beings here.
There is a sense that you're actually looking at that in the small room of drawings there. He does drawings, I think, when he gets stuck very often, but it does look as though you're looking through a microscope sometimes.
Well, yes, and I have to say that I think the drawings are the things in the exhibition that you come across them virtually by surprise in a little room. It's lovely, it's a lovely surprise. And they are the things which are least material. And I think, they may be just the most successful thing in the whole exhibition, where the idea of the artist translates most directly into visual form for the spectators.
And what do you make of the relationship between the private, or perhaps I should say the intimate in his work, and the very public? Sculpture is a public thing, it seems to me, a sort of plastic thing in a way that even painting sometimes isn't. And yet some of his work is so small, so quiet, so sort of rooted on the floor almost, that it seems acutely personal.
Well, the floor show, if you'll pardon the term, which he describes as art for other people, is a marvellous, marvellous landscape, or you might say beachscape, of many small objects grouped together in this space the size of a basketball court. And the placing, I mean, I must say it's a brilliant piece of programming on the part of the Tate staff to place these objects directly in relation to the beachscape, which is actually quite close to the Tate itself. It's as if the Tate's interior has been flooded and then the water's gone away again and left objects behind, some of which are natural and some of which are these kind of nasty man-made things like kind of diseased rubber ducks, which have been left behind on a beach. And this wonderful feeling of the famous 20th century thing, the objet trouvé, being translated into our time and our place in Liverpool. It's a beautiful installation. I don't think we'll ever see the work quite like that again. And I didn't.
Alistair Smith, thank you very much. Richard Deacon's exhibition, New World Order, is at the Tate Gallery in Liverpool from Saturday until May the 20th.
Well, the Tate Gallery Liverpool's major spring exhibition opens tomorrow. It's the work of Richard Deacon, one of Britain's leading sculptors. He won the Turner Prize in 1987 and was awarded a CBE in the recent New Year's Honours List in recognition of his contribution to the arts. None of the work in the exhibition has been shown publicly before in Britain, and Richard Deacon has created several new sculptures which will be shown alongside his drawings and works incorporating photography. He uses materials such as plastic, cloth, resins and glass, as well as bronze and sheet metal, and language, both spoken and written, plays an important part in Richard Deacon's work, as he told me in conversation with Lewis Biggs, director of the Tate Gallery Liverpool.
I started writing extensively when I was at St Martin's. When I began writing letters to my mother, describing what I was doing. And then that developed into other ways of writing, other ways of describing work, and using writing as a substitute for photography.
What about the titles of your work? They play a very important role. You draw, for instance, on the Bible and poetry and fairy stories. Titling
is a way of, it seems to me like a way of working with the work. It also brings language into it, since I'm quite interested in the way that language is involved in the ways we interact with the world, and also to either direct attention or misdirect attention or point out or whatever things that I think are going on.
I've always found the titles very helpful, even if they're misleading or misdirecting, as Richard says, because they allow you to think of the work in an extended sense. Instead of just an object in a gallery, they remind you that the work belongs in a wider culture. Looking at the exhibition, you seem to shape your work rather than perhaps carve or model. You use a variety of materials, including steel, laminated wood, corrugated iron, cloth, leather. And when people view your work as we are now, you can see the screws and the rivets, an integral part of the work.
I've always made the material processes quite evident. And I do think that shaping is what I do. I think I tend to work a bit like a kind of tailor. Most of the problems that I encounter are not unlike tailoring problems that you have when you're trying to put a sleeve on a coat or whatever. But in most cases, I start with a two-dimensional material that's folded, bent, heated or whatever to form a three-dimensional form. The processes of stitching it together, of putting it together, are practical, and also slightly obsessive. But they also work a bit like punctuation. I love that analogy of the tailor, because very often a tailor will use the seams. Richard then went on to talk about punctuation, which was what occurred to me also. But a good tailor will use seams in order to make sense of the body and to make sense of what it is that the clothes are trying to do. And you read those seams as being, as it were, punctuation within the clothing. Angela said a little earlier that the
work in the 80s was oriented around perception, organs of perception and so on. But something which you've said about your own work in the 90s is that it's become more abstract. But abstract not in the sense of content less, but abstract in the sense of being more ambitious in what it is that it's trying to say. I mean, reaching after abstract, higher ideas.
You've created several new pieces for this exhibition. Perhaps you could tell me a little bit about them.
A big work called After, the third in a series of large bent wooden works, which has in this case also has a rather elaborate stainless steel strip going down the middle of it. It's a very large work. It's about 30 feet long. Undulates up and down, quite serpentine-like. Across the middle there's this woven stainless steel strip which reflects the as you walk around it, you're reflected in the stainless steel. The other two works are smaller. There's a spun aluminium piece which is called Blow. I suppose somewhat self-explanatory. It's kind of it uses blow both in two ways, both as a sense of that which is inflated and as that which is kind of hit. It tries to combine that kind of sense of lightness.
So we're not sure whether it's expanding or contracting. It's kind of trying to do both at once.
Yeah, it's trying to do both at once. And then the third work is a small table. It's called table, actually, although the tabletop has kind of dropped through and become the table bottom, rather more like a flower that sits on the floor, rather beautifully crafted open.
I think something which Richard's been too modest to say is just how beautiful the work is and how beautiful the exhibition is going to be, and what an enormous amount there is to look at. I mean, you talked about the detail in the construction of the works, which does draw people in fantastically, but it's mind-boggling the amount of labour that has gone into this show. Each of these big works takes literally thousands of hours of labour to make them. And that in itself is something which you read subconsciously. It comes over immediately as being of significance and value. But you can't help but feel that these are actually speaking to you, speaking volumes, and I think it will have a tremendously wide and deep appeal.
A New World Order, the work of sculptor Richard Deacon, is at the Tate Gallery, Liverpool, from tomorrow until the 16th of May. The gallery is open Tuesday to Sunday from 10 until 6, and admission to this exhibition is £3, concessions are £2, and it's £6 for a family ticket.
Alternatively, you might want to put that money towards a rail ticket to Liverpool, where a new exhibition of the work of Richard Deacon has just opened at the Tate Gallery. One of a group of young British sculptors who emerged in the 1980s, Deacon won the Turner Prize in 1987, and he's worked widely in Europe since. The Tate show, which Deacon has called New World Order, takes in work done in the last 10 years, and it includes 3 striking new large-scale pieces, each of which dominates a single room in the top floor gallery. Deacon's work has always shown evidence of careful craftsmanship. He draws on techniques that are more associated with manufacturing than fine art, and here he's moved up the scale to light engineering. L'Aircourne, which refers to a famous classical bronze, consists of a vast, involved coil constructed out of wood framing and aluminium castings, and its curves and twists are echoed by What Could Make Me Feel This Way. The works in an ongoing series called Art for Other People are much smaller in scale. They apparently allude to a world of microscopic organisms and single-cell plants. Carol Rutter, there's always a very straightforward pleasure, I think, in looking at Deacon's work, because you can always see where the work's gone. They're beautifully finished and beautifully made. But beyond that, they are very enigmatic, aren't they? They look like machines, but it's almost impossible to tell what the machine is for or what it's meant to do.
Yes, those ones that are called art for other people, which I walked into the room and thought of them as toys. On the one hand, they look like bits of anatomy, and the other hand, they look like bits of industry, alchemists' pumps and so on. The ones that I liked best, I think, were the ones that were beautifully polished wood, that were the small pieces that if you poked them, they moved, and I did. I poked everything in the exhibition on the understanding that he is a fabricator as well as a sculptor, and that even if it's called art, it still ought to be handled.
The finish is, and because he makes a big play out of some things are beautifully finished to a very high gloss, and other things are left rather rough so that you can see all the workings. What did you make of this show?
I love the use of materials. As you say, the finish on the beechwood, the turning of it is really lovely, and the use of grain where it blackens when you steam it is very nice. Also, his extraordinary use of materials that are just lying around. There's one exhibit in there which actually is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in an art gallery. I think it means you to be disgusted by it. It's kind of like a collection of eyeballs, and they're furry, and it's curtain rings. It's wooden curtain rings that are actually holding the openings apart, and he's put something on it that makes it seep all the time. It's really...
Well, it looks like fiberglass or something, sticky globules. That was the thing that made me think of microorganisms and phagocytes or something like that.
Yeah. So it's a really inventive and lovely use of material.
I thought those big sculptures in the room that overlooks the Mersey are wonderfully exhilarating, though. That was intensely sort of exciting for me, I think, that room.
I thought that was the best bit. I thought they looked like scale models of white knuckle rides at theme parks. There are all these deep flows and sudden dips, and as you say, you can see how they've been constructed, and yet you couldn't go home and do it yourself. I mean, they're both beautiful and obviously constructed, and they're very good and incredibly tactile. There's all sorts of things that he's used, little bits of cardboard, and you want to touch it and see whether he's just left it as cardboard or whether he's added some sort of horrible resin to it. But I think those great big ones work really well in the Tate Gallery as well. The rooms seem to be completely filled by them, yet there's plenty of space to walk around.
In fact, the space is almost too small for one of them.
The one that looks like what could make me feel...
Looks like a lot of old Matthias Rosé bottles.
I thought it looked like a combine harvester myself.
The Wicker Man's tank.
Because it filled up the whole thing. But the one that was called After looked to me like a boa constrictor that was hiding out as a roller coaster, because it had on the boat a combination of the animal feel to it, but also something quite mechanical, and those kind of vertiginous drops that it was possible.
And Tom's right. It does look like you're looking at an organism through microscope, and he also uses that in a lot of his paintings as well. I thought that there were themes that came through. You know, when you first walk in, there are these screens, windows where he's painted very similar things actually to the structures he's used.
Well, he's obviously obsessed with sinuosity and curves and so on. I thought the other striking thing, he's got some of his graphic works on the walls here, and basically, I mean, the word to use is doodles, but it seems to me he's taken and that what he does with the sculpture is doodle in space, and he shows you that actually doodling is a serious activity, that it can be to do with creating something complex out of very simple movements.
He also wants you always to be playing with sight and the penetration of sight. So he takes those doodles and then superimposes those upon a photograph of a landscape. Those they feel almost as though they're kind of after Magritte kind of surrealism, which didn't work for me. I didn't like those very much until I turned around standing in the gallery and looked out the window and saw precisely that outside the window across Mersey Harbour, where that landscape is then has superimposed upon it precisely the same kind of industrial doodle. But I loved the way in all of the big sculptures you constantly saw through as though you were looking through the vertebra of animals.
But it also has line. I mean, line is very important to him as a sculptor, isn't it? That, again, you know, the big sculpture, what could make me feel this way? It reminded me of those Leonardo drawings of vortices in water and turbulence. There's a sort